what I mean by being data-driven. There's a lot of talk about data right now. I think it's one of those buzzwords, one of those terms that is maybe at risk of losing its meaning. There's been a lot of talk about big data. I'm not going to talk about big data. I promise that'll be the last time I mention it over the course of the talk. What I'm talking about is leveraging data and being data-driven in a law firm. And being data-driven is really about leveraging data insights to make better business decisions. And a law firm, at the end of the day, is a business, and like many other businesses, law firms should be leveraging data to make better decisions. If we look at some of the biggest and most successful companies in the world, the truly great ones are pulling ahead by doing a better job of leveraging data. And I'll give you a few examples of what this looks like as inspiration. First of all, Amazon. If you've wondered how Amazon is able to get you goods, in some cases less than one day or the same day you've ordered them, it's because it's able to analyze your buying habits and actually predict what you're going to buy before you buy it and front-run goods to its warehouses that are geographically close to you based on your buying habits and the buying habits of those around you. It's just unbelievable what technology is allowing companies like Amazon to do. Companies like Google are leveraging data not just to give you better search results and more accurate search results, but even in their own hiring. They now have a workforce of 100,000 people, and they did a company-wide survey trying to understand the properties of their best performing teams. What was the personality makeup? What was the mix of extroverts versus introverts? Did they have lunch together? And they were able to leverage those findings to help create more high-performing teams. A really unique way to use data and leverage data. GE, which is what we think of as the prototypical industrial company, now calls itself a software company and a data company. Jeffrey Immelt recently talked about GE needing to reframe itself as a technology startup because it realizes it's not just building devices like engines, it's creating the opportunity for its customers to leverage the data, for example, of the 30,000 GE engines flying around the world at any given moment. They're able to leverage that data to make better servicing decisions and make better business decisions. And what about the practice of law? This is a profession that is over 4,000 years old, and I think most of us would be hard-pressed to identify any way that the practice has really leveraged data in a significant way to evolve how it runs itself and how we run our practices. And here are some examples of data-driven questions that I think a lot of lawyers would like to be able to ask and receive data-driven answers for. But these questions are often met with, I don't know, I guess I'll ask somebody what they think, rather than actually looking to data to drive those answers. Questions as simple as, what should my hourly rate be? Or maybe even a meta level above this, should I be billing by the hour or should I be billing flat rate? If I practice in several areas, should I be billing different rates in those different practice areas? Should I bill hourly or should I bill flat rate? Which states have the most favorable hourly rates? And the answers to these questions have been asked in some places, but most of the surveys out there on the legal profession are based on very stale data. For example, one of the most recent demographic surveys from the ABA is from 2005, so we're looking at data that's over a decade old. It's based on self-reported data, so asking lawyers and getting responses back to questions like, what is your utilization rate? And they're also based on very limited sample sizes, which doesn't really give us enough data to build a case for industry-wide trends. And what we realized about a year ago is that there is an unbelievable wealth of data in the billing patterns of customers that are using Clio. And it's over 40,000 legal professionals that utilize Clio. And we had data similar to GE in the same way they're monitoring 140 million flight hours in the engines in their planes, or the engines that are on their customers' planes. We have the same kind of data being emitted almost as data exhaust by our customers. And is there an opportunity to leverage that data in an aggregated and anonymized way so that individuals' privacy is obviously respected, but provide that data back to the profession so that the profession can leverage that data to make better data-driven decisions? And that was the genesis of a report that we released about 6 months ago called the Legal Trends Report. And it's the first data-driven report in the legal industry in history to be based on actual billing data generated by lawyers rather than self-reported data. And what this allows us to do is give you insights in terms of how you're performing against a peer set, for example, in a geographic area. Here we can see an example of a lawyer that's billing $150 per hour for their work. And we're able to, down to the zip code level, identify other lawyers that are in that geography and tell you how you're doing against that local benchmark for billable rates. And you may be able to identify that you're either above or below market when it comes to average billable rates. We're able to look at national level statistics as well. So across all of the United States, the average billable rate is $232 per hour. This is the first time in the industry's history we're able to look at aggregated data and to provide this kind of response, this kind of data insight. We're also able to see over the history of Clio's existence, and we reached statistically significant numbers in terms of user base in 2010. So we're able to look back at the last 7 years and see how the billable hour index has evolved over that time. And you can see that there's been a small increase in the billable hour index, the average billable rate across the country over that time. But when we can compare it against the consumer price index, you can see that it's actually failing to keep up with the rate of inflation. So in real terms, lawyers are making slightly less today than they were in 2010. We're also able to look at some really fascinating data, like the billable hour per state. And we can see that the highest billable rate in the United States is DC. You can see they're billing almost $240 per hour, whereas lawyers in Iowa are billing on average less than half that. Here's a heat map of billable hour rates across the United States. You can see that California has the highest average hourly billable rate at $267 per hour. You can see our home state here, Illinois, is doing pretty well at $243 an hour. But we're able to make another interesting comparison, which is how do billable hour rates compare to cost of living indices? And here we are able to look at national statistics on consumer index data and purchasing parity power in various states and normalize the billable hour rate against the cost of living to get what we call the real billable hour as an index. And we can see that even though California has the highest average billable rate, it's also one of the most expensive states to live in the United States, where $100 as the benchmark only buys you $89 worth of goods in California. So we're able to normalize those billable rates against the cost of living and create two ranked lists. One is the top 10 states by billable hour, and we can see here's the top 10. I'll let you read through that, with DC topping out the list, Illinois at number 7. But when we normalize this data by the cost of living, you can see where the best states are in terms of the actual billable hour normalized by the cost of living. And here, Illinois jumps from number 7 to number 3 because it's got only a slightly lower average billable rate than California, but it's a much more affordable state to live in. And so I know there's a lot of law students in the audience today. This is data. You can make data-driven decisions on where the best place to practice law might be, or where you might not want to practice law. The bottom 10 states for average billable hour. And again, we can normalize these states by the cost of living to get the real billable hour. We can also look at billable rates by practice area. We're also able to look at what fee structures are used by practice area. So if you're in a given practice area, you want to understand, is it normal to charge by the hour, or is flat rate more common, or is contingency more common? You can see that data in the Legal Trends Report. The last thing I want to talk about when we're framing up, building a data-driven law firm is a discussion around law firm KPIs. And I think if we're looking at our law firms and we're trying to assess how efficient are they and where's there room for us to optimize things, there's a set of KPIs that we should be looking at that can help us be data-driven and help us iterate on how we operate in our law firm. What I mean by KPIs, by the way, is key performance indicators. And for a law firm, there's really three key KPIs that almost every law firm out there can and should be monitoring. Those are utilization rate, realization rate, and collection rate, which in short are how many hours were billable in a day, how much work did I actually bill for, and what did I actually get paid for at the end of the day. So you can think about this as a funnel. At the top of the funnel, we have a day with an upper bound, I guess, of 24 hours of billable time, potentially in a day, and all the way down to the collection rate, which is the money that you actually deposit in your bank account at the end of the day. And this is some fascinating data. When we look at utilization rate, we're looking at the chargeable hours out of the available hours in the day. So again, maybe you call your workday an 8-hour workday. If you spend 4 hours on administrative and overhead tasks and 4 hours on billable client work, your utilization rate would be 50%. The Legal Trends Report, we did an analysis of this data of what clients were actually billing, and the average utilization rate was only 28%. And what this stands in stark contrast to is surveys that come from LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, for example, where self-reported data from lawyers, this rate is often 40 to 80% if you ask lawyers what their utilization rate. And I think this is a trap that many surveys that are based on self-reported data fall into, which is we tend to view ourselves more favorably and want to report statistics that seem more favorable than the reality might be. And the data doesn't lie, and the data tells us that the average utilization rate is 28%, which means out of an average workday, if we're calling a workday 8 hours, and I know many of you long for a workday as short as 8 hours, but if we imagine it's 8 hours, that means you're only getting 2.2 billable hours out of every workday. We can look at utilization rate by state, and we can also look at utilization rate versus the number of attorneys in a firm. And I know there's a number of solos and small firms in the audience as well as large firms. And I think what this data shows is really interesting, which is solos have the lowest utilization rate at just 22%. I think this is unsurprising because you're doing everything. And the utilization rate increases as we move up to law firms of about 12 users, which for us is the upper bound of, or 12 lawyers rather, which is for us the upper bound of what we consider statistically significant. But I think what is really interesting is this plateau that we see between 4 and 8 lawyers where utilization rate really doesn't change. But it seems like there might be the concept of a sweet spot or an optimal firm size where you reach some critical mass that you're able to increase your utilization rate pretty dramatically. And just by moving to a group of 5 or 6 lawyers, you're able to almost double the average utilization rate of lawyers in the firm. And I think this is a really important take-home concept. The realization rate, which again is out of our billable time in a day, what do we actually bill to our clients? So in some cases we throw away billable time, in some cases we discount our bills. So there's typically a gap between what we actually worked in billable work and what the client actually sees on the invoice we send them at the end of the day. And that's the value of the billed hours over the value of utilized hours. And on average, we wrote down our bills or omitted time so that we are ultimately billing our clients for only 81% of the work we actually did for them. So there's a 19% average discount being applied to our bills. And again, we can see which states have the best realization rates. We can also look at realization rates by practice area. We can understand what are the best performing and worst performing practice areas by realization rate. Personal injury has the lowest realization rate. Family law has one of the highest realization rates. And finally, there's collection rate, which is the collected revenue, so the billable hours that actually get paid by our clients over the value of billed hours. So we all have bad debts. We have clients that never pay us, and we have clients that may only pay us a portion of the service we deliver to them. And that disparity gives us the collection rate. And on average, lawyers in Clio saw an 86% collection rate. Again, we can look at this collection rate data by state and understand what are the best and worst performing states by collection rate. And we can also see the collection rate by practice areas. You can kind of size up your risk of not getting paid by practice area. And you're also able to combine this data and look at collection rate by state and collection rate by practice area and start to understand the real behavior of the consumers in your geographic area. And the data point I want to conclude with is what I consider a pretty devastating funnel for lawyers and the revenue they collect today. Because if we look at our typical workday, whether it's 8 hours or 16 hours, the average utilization rate is only 2 hours per day. And then we would look at the realization rate of 81%, we end up with 1.4 hours of revenue we're collecting on per day. And when we look at the 81% collection rate across the United States, the average lawyer is only getting paid for 1.4 hours of work per day. And this actually ties in really well when you look at income level data at a federal level for the average solo or small firm attorney. This data ties in perfectly when we look at the average hourly rate and this number of hours billed per day across the entire workforce. And if there's not a data point that condemns the billable hour model and sets the stage for us reframing how we're looking at things and maybe iterating on how we deliver services to our clients and how we get paid for those, I don't know what other than this data could make a stronger case for that.